Okay, so last week we did a session on serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. So if you want to go check that video out, it's last week's video, it's on our YouTube. You can check out how I spoke about those three neurotransmitters. And I said I'm going to do a series on dopamine, and we are going to do a whole series on dopamine. Don't know exactly how many weeks we're going to be busy with dopamine, but a very, very important neurotransmitter, plays a very big role in us, in our mood, in our motivation, in our reward, in our pleasure. When dopamine is high, we feel very motivated, we feel very pleasurable. When dopamine is low, we feel very unmotivated and very unpleasant, if I can say it like that. And a lot of times the things we do that gets us on a dopamine high can also cause us to go to a dopamine low because of the overstimulation of dopamine. Understanding dopamine and understanding the balance, how to balance dopamine is a very, very important part of life, and something that I feel is necessary to understand. So, what is dopamine, and what effect does dopamine have in the brain? So dopamine is a neurotransmitter in the brain that plays a crucial role in reward, motivation, and pleasure. Dopamine helps regulate mood, attention, and movement, and imbalances in dopamine levels can affect various mental and physical conditions. So one thing that's very, very important to remember when it comes to dopamine is the part of reward, is the part of pleasure, the part of motivation, and it plays a big role in things like your motor reactions, taking actions, taking movement. So ultimately, a person with low dopamine will not have a lot of motivation for things in life. So let's quickly look at this image of the brain. So a lot of times when we, use certain things, we can say things like sugar, pleasurable activities, such as, it can be healthy activities such as exercising, running, spending time with friends in a social group. And like I said, things like sugar, things like foods, will cause the release of dopamine to a place in the brain called the nucleus accumbens. And you will see there on the brain image, you will see the nucleus accumbens. And the nucleus accumbens also has to do a lot with reward, motivation, and pleasure. So when the ventral tegmental area sends dopamine to the nucleus accumbens, we feel very rewarded, we feel a lot of pleasure, we feel a lot of motivation. And there's another part of the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala has to do with mood regulation. This is where we feel either very happy or very sad, or when we feel happy or sad, you feel in love, you feel dreadful. That is the amygdala that plays a role. And the amygdala is also very much affected, one of the brain parts that is very much affected by the dopamine release. And obviously when the amygdala feels happy, it wants to feel that more and more. And then we have this part called the hippocampus. The hippocampus has to do with learning and memory. So it remembers when something rewarded us very well, or when we have been rewarded for a certain action. And it also remembers when there wasn't a big amount of reward. So when there's like punishment, or when there's like something that's unpleasurable, dopamine and the nucleus accumbens will be lower, and then it's unpleasurable, and the hippocampus will remember the event as unpleasurable. This is why you will see people who has been in a very bad relationship, for instance, when they were in a relationship that was very abusive, caused a lot of anxiety, caused a lot of stress. That caused the lowering of dopamine levels when the dopamine levels were lower. A person didn't feel reward, a person didn't feel pleasure, and when a person didn't feel reward, didn't feel pleasure, the hippocampus remembers that, and the amygdala, the part of the brain that has to do with mood regulation, feels that. And the hippocampus is very close to the amygdala, and they work very close together. So the hippocampus will communicate to the amygdala and say, listen, the relationship that you were in caused you to feel bad. So what happens, even if a person wants to go into a new relationship, it's almost like as if there's like a lot of warning signs, because the hippocampus is now communicating to the amygdala saying, listen, this gave us a bad experience. Now remember, for the nucleus accumbens, that means that the bad experience was low in dopamine levels. We didn't feel pleasure, and we don't feel motivated to do the same thing, because the nucleus accumbens has to do with motivation, and dopamine also has to do with motivation. And there's a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is part of the neocortex. Now, all the other parts in the brain is part of the limbic system, the parts that we discussed, like the nucleus accumbens, the amygdala, the hippocampus. It's part of the limbic system. Now, the limbic system has to do with emotions. It's the feeling part of the brain. So when dopamine is high, the limbic system feels very good. When dopamine is low, the limbic system doesn't feel very good. Now, the prefrontal cortex is part of the neocortex, which has to do with thinking and logic. Now, the prefrontal cortex plays a big role in decision making and attention. So when dopamine levels are low, it affects the prefrontal cortex, where decision making is not easy and attention is not easy. This is why dopamine can also help us to pay attention to something and to focus on something. So dopamine is something that makes us feel brilliantly. We can just feel, if you feel motivated, if you feel pleasure, and you feel focus, you feel like you give attention, you get into this mode of flow. And this is how dopamine influences the brain. Now, a lot of times we get into activities that releases dopamine. Some of those activities can be things like sugar, junk food, and these are obviously not good activities. Alcohol. So things like that are activities that we take part of that can release dopamine. Now, I'm not saying never eat sugar, or you may not drink alcohol, you may not eat junk food. This is not what this is about, because I think I will be a total hypocrite if I say that I actually had a chocolate and a hamburger last night. But because those things release dopamine in the brain, it can make you feel very good. And if you do it over and over and over again, then you can become addicted to something. And then you reach a place where that's called neuroadaptation. Neuroadaptation is where your brain kind of gets used to this dopamine being released. It gets into a place of tolerance, and then you need more of the same thing to get the same result. So if you get to a place where you need to eat sugar the whole time to feel good, where you need to drink a lot of alcohol to feel good, this means the brain is now craving that release of dopamine. So what happens when you give the brain this release of dopamine? When dopamine is overstimulated in the brain, it can lead to a dopamine crash. Meaning, when dopamine is overstimulated, there's a rush of dopamine in the brain. Now the brain tries to balance it out. To balance it out, sometimes it will release other things like cortisol. We can almost say close the doors and say, listen, wait, hang on, we cannot take this much dopamine. It causes a little bit of a drop, and then you need more and more of the same thing. It's almost like it's now knocking on the door harder and harder to get in. And this is how addiction is formed, and this is how addiction is growing. This is why people, if you say the reason you crave sugar and the reason you crave hamburgers and not broccoli, for instance, it's not because the hamburger and the sugar or the cheesecake tastes better than the broccoli. It definitely does taste better, but that's not why you crave it. The reason you crave it is because of the amount of dopamine that it sends to the nucleus accumbens, and it feels very good. It feels very exciting. And remember, the limbic system, that emotional part of the brain, doesn't think logically. The neocortex is the part of the brain that thinks logically. The limbic system doesn't think logically. So the limbic system wants what feels good. So if it feels good for the limbic system to have dopamine, it doesn't really care about anything else. It just wants the dopamine. Now there are some substances that are much stronger and much more addictive. And the reason they are more addictive is because they send more units of dopamine to the nucleus accumbens. This is why eating sugar now and then is okay. You won't get like overly addicted to it if you eat it now and then. But if you get to a place where you need to take it every now and then, where you need to take it every day, and you get addicted to it, that means that the brain gets to that place where it craves that dopamine release. For instance, that sugar gives a person. If you get to things like drugs and things like that, it releases. This is why it's banned, and this is why a person shouldn't use it, and this is why it's illegal to use it, because it sends like a rush, lots and lots of dopamine to the nucleus accumbens, and then a person gets to the place because it sends so much units to the nucleus accumbens that general activities that gives you a good amount of dopamine, that gives you a healthy amount of dopamine, is not enough. So now a person will abandon things that's healthy. People will abandon things that's good for them just to get to the substance, because of the amount of dopamine that releases. But remember, if you get an unhealthy amount or an overstimulation or amount of dopamine into your brain starts to crave that. And for your brain, for that moment, for that season, healthy releases of dopamine is just not enough. This is why we have to know how to balance dopamine. This is also why it's important to know how to rest. Even pleasurable activities, a person can love their job, love their business, love their work, love to exercise, but even if they overdo those things, because they love it, because it's pleasurable. I love my job, I love to exercise, I love all these things. I do it. It gives me this overstimulation of dopamine, and after that I crash. This is why people get into a burnout. So knowing how to balance dopamine release is extremely important, and this is what we're going to speak about in the next session. I'm going to do small sessions. I'm not going to do like one long video. I'm going to do about 10-minute videos every single week about dopamine, and this is something you can keep following. So next week we're going to speak about, or next session we're going to speak about, is going to be about how to have a healthy balance of dopamine in your brain. What are healthy ways to release dopamine? What are unhealthy ways to release dopamine? And like I said, say for instance, eating sugar. I love cheesecake, for instance. Eating a cheesecake now and then, yes, it will release dopamine, yes, it will make you feel good, but if you do it every now and then and you can manage it, it's not a bad thing. If you balance it out with other healthy things that you do on a daily basis, exercise, rest, spending time with people, having a balanced, healthy diet, say for instance during the week, then it's not that bad. If you go into things like hard drugs, it's immediately bad. Things like pornography, it's immediately bad, because it's part of the seesaw effect that causes a dopamine rise and then a dopamine crash. So we're going to speak about what are healthy releases of dopamine, unhealthy releases of dopamine that you don't want to get into, and why the balance of dopamine is so important. I'm going to ask you to subscribe to this channel and ring the bell so that you can get notifications on when we are doing more videos. We're trusting to get to 1,000 subscribers, and your subscription can help us to get there. Thank you so much for watching. We are excited to see you through this whole series, and I hope you stick with us through this whole series, because we do believe if you understand dopamine, it's going to help your life a lot. And if you understand if you understand the balance of dopamine, it will help you a lot. We're also going to speak about neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to adapt, to reshape, to change over the span of life, and this can also help you with healing, breaking certain addictions and certain habits. So we're going to speak about that. Thank you so much for watching. We are looking forward to see you soon again. Goodbye.